Okay, yeah. All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming today. This evening, actually, and today's live stream, we have a really special person with us. And to be honest, I'm her fan because she's amazing. I mean, she's amazing in literally everything that I was seeing in her CV. That you can easily find on the internet, by the way, and that in the place that I got her email as well. So we have to please welcome Fleur, and she has plenty experience in caving. She has been caving for 25 years, and she has been like in so many amazing places. And today's live stream, we'll be talking about Som Hein, which the longest cave in Myanmar. Hopefully, I'm taking the pronunciation of this word right or understandable enough to make you know about the subject of tonight's live stream. And then feel free to talk with us. Feel free to comment everything that you want to say. And I'll be collecting all the questions, and we will have a quick chat after the presentation. And if you just want to pop up something on our Facebook as well, or Instagram, or leave here in the chat, just feel free to connect yourself with us. All right. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you so much, Fleur, for being here with us and accepting this invite. It's so important that you are here with us and sharing all your knowledge and all the misery that you passed through this exploring and serving Som Hein. Thank you so much.
No, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks for people who have tuned in. I'm not sure even tuned in is the right word. I'm showing my age. Logged in. I'm going to tell you a bit about our most recent caving expedition to Myanmar, where we explored what turned out to be the longest cave in the country. Sadly, times have changed since then. So although we were there in December and January, we haven't been able to be on caving expedition since, but nonetheless, this is still relatively hot off the press. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to tell you a bit about the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project, under which the umbrella this expedition happened, something about the caves in Myanmar, the Eastern Shan area where we went on this expedition, how we got there, and important things about permissions. Of course, lots and lots about the cave itself, and some thoughts about what might happen next in our uncertain world we're currently living in. So the first thing to show you is this map from a scientific paper. It's a map of all the Permian geological age limestones in Myanmar. Now, not all the limestone in Myanmar is of Permian age, but the reason I like showing this map is, I'm going to just see if I can get my pointer to work, is if you look up here in the top left, there's a 400-kilometer scale bar on this map. So if you look at the area of the karst, it's huge. Like, the limestone area is massive. The potential for cave exploration in this country is really quite large. And whilst there have been trips before in the past, particularly some early explorations by the French and also the British, it's really been in the last decade that there's been a systematic attempt to start documenting the caves in Myanmar. And that's come about largely because of the guy in the top left here, York Drybolt, who is the brains behind the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project. So in 2008, York made some contacts with the Myanmar Tourism Promotion Board, and through them got permissions from the Ministry of Hotels and Tourism to run an initial very small reconnaissance expedition in 2009. Following that, my good friend Imogen Furlong, in the bottom left picture, organized the first, I was going to say larger scale expedition. Actually, there were only 4 of us that year, 6 of us the year after. The initial reconnaissance were in the Cayenne and Mon states, but then with Imogen, we started focusing on the Shan states. And these initial trips eventually led to the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project. Now, typically, there's somewhere between 1 and 3 trips running a year. They're increasingly international, and they're increasingly having significant local participation and having really good conservation outcomes in the country as well. So it's really evolved over 10 years and it's become a very, very successful project. But none of this would have happened without Jorgen and Imogen. So some things that have happened recently under the auspices of the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project and also Flora and Fauna International was the first Myanmar Caver training in 2017 and a number of other events since. These are really good events for raising awareness about caves and cave mapping and cave conservation within Myanmar. Participants were taught about surveying as well as vertical rope skills. And then there have been some really good knock-on effects in terms of conservation. So on the top right, we've got a Flora and Fauna International workshop on cave biodiversity. On the bottom right, we've got a cave information sign with like pictures of the cave life and other information about the caves that's up in one of the local areas. And then on the left, you can see some photographs from consultation meetings about development of karst protection zones. So none of these things would have come about either without the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project or in the last 3 years, the significant involvement and development of cavers within Myanmar. So that's been some really, really good news in recent years. Now, where's the caving? Okay, so here's our map of the Permian limestone, and most of that falls in this band here between the Northern Shan State, the Southern Shan State, and Kaya. And that's where most of the expeditions have happened, although this year we went to the Eastern Shan, which I'll talk about in a moment, but mostly it's happening in this area. The longest cave, certainly up till the middle of last year, was Kayak Keung, or Stone Cave, which is located in the Southern Shan State and was just a shy under 5 kilometers long. The deepest cave in Myanmar is about 300 meters deep. So what you'll get the idea is that most of the caves are quite long. They're either active river caves or there may be large fossil galleries that are very well decorated. And I want to particularly draw your attention to last year's Myanmar Cave Survey t-shirt of the 5 longest caves in the country. You can see the top 2, they're in the Southern Shan State, and the bottom 3 there are in Kaya State. And this t-shirt's going to feature heavily in the upcoming presentation. So the Eastern Shan. Why did we want to go to the Eastern Shan? Well, the Permian limestones are mainly in the Northern, Southern Shan and Kaya, but we knew there were some parts of limestone in the Eastern Shan. And reconnaissance had been done via Google Earth and via kind of open source geographical data, and we knew there were karst features on the ground. We tried to go there about 3 years previously, but unfortunately our permissions were withdrawn at the last minute. However, it's a really interesting place. It's ethnically quite diverse. You've got the borders with China, Thailand and Laos very close by. You've got a number of significant minorities, including the Akha Christian minority. And as I said, we had a sniff of the cave. Now, what we didn't know at the time we were planning this trip was that the cave was called Som Hein, which in the Shan language translates loosely as famous mountain. We just knew that there was a cave significant enough to be known in other parts of the Shan state. So we kind of heard people talking about it, and we'd seen evidence from satellite imagery. So here's some GIS data that Mike Futrell pulled together following Pete's efforts on Google Earth. Anything colored pink or kind of purple is enclosed depressions. And what happened was we can identify there was this big sink here where water was going underground, and we couldn't work out where it was coming out. And as I say, that evidence was backed up by Google Earth. We had no idea where the resurgence was, and caves are where you find them. The only thing to do is go and have a look and see what you can find on the ground. Now, this was the first expedition that we had organized via Facebook. Towards the end of 2019, we used the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project Facebook page to say, we think there's some caves in this area. Essentially, who would like to come and help us search for them? And we were really, really fortunate that this young man, Nini Ung, replied and said that he would come and meet us and help us look for caves in this area. And I have to say, without his help, we would not have been able to pursue this project, and he is an absolutely integral part of this story. So the caving team for this trip. Now, obviously not everybody in this photograph is the caving team. This is Christmas celebrations with the Aka minority in the Eastern Shan. But who you can see is Nini, who you've just seen on the right, myself, Pete Talling, Dominic Furling, and Mike and Andrea Futrell. So it was quite a small trip, but we were going to tackle the challenge ahead of us. So what did we do? In the past, when we've been on expeditions in Myanmar, we've normally flown into Yangon and then taken internal flights to the Shan state, basically. But because this part of the Eastern Shan is a bit further away, and we were also slightly uncertain about what was going to happen when we get there, we decided in this situation we would cross directly from Thailand, because the border between Mae Sai in Thailand and the city of Tachalek in the Eastern Shan is one of the few open crossing points. So this time we flew to Chiang Rai, we took the bus to Mae Sai, and we crossed the border into Myanmar on foot to enter Tachalek. And this is a picture of the border that we're crossing on foot. It's a crazy, bustling place, as you might expect, with a busy border towns and cities on either side. A little extra mayhem added by the fact that on one side of the border, the traffic and the people are moving on the left-hand side of the road. On the other side, they're moving on the right-hand side of the road. And somewhere in this bridge over the river, everything has to swap sides. Now, when we got over the other side, we were met by this gentleman, Mew. Now, Mew is another absolutely integral part of the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project and the expedition that we were on. Mew had driven from the southern Shan state in his vehicle, which was to be the expedition vehicle. We hired him to help us both with transport and logistics locally. Normally, he's taking tourists to perhaps more salubrious locations and holes in the ground, but we know that really he loves working with the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project. If you take a careful look at the front of his van, he's got a little sticker on it for the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project. So this really is the official vehicle of caving expeditions in Myanmar. And again, without Mew, nothing would be happening here. Once Mew and Nini met us in the city of Tachalek, the first thing we had to do was go to the Ministry of Hotels and Tourism, let them know that we were there and what we wanted to do, and could they help us gain access to the caving area. So we spent a bit of time in their office getting out all our plans, all our Google Earth images, all the reports from previous expeditions and previous cave surveys to show them what it was we were going to do and get their support. After that, we were on into the Golden Triangle city of Tachalek, where we stayed for a few nights whilst these permissions sorted themselves through. Now, as well as getting permission from the ministry, we also needed to seek consent and support of an important local monastery. So this is the new monastery at Mon Ling, a little bit north of the city of Tachalek. And we went there to see this man, the Seador, or head monk at the monastery. And we had a really, really interesting audience with him. It was clear he knew the cave really well. So this was when we first started to understand that yes, this cave definitely did exist. It was called Som Hein, and it was probably really quite a long cave. Everybody we spoke to about the cave told us it was very long. A lot of the monks could describe in detail some aspects of it. In particular, they kept coming back to a mention of waterfall, and most importantly, they really welcomed our visit and our intention to map the cave. In the couple of days we spent staying in Tachelek, we also explored and mapped a couple of smaller caves that were nearby. So this is Pete and Mike and Nini comparing notes on the survey of the first cave to be mapped in the Eastern Shan. And this particular little cave was near a different monastery, a small monastery called the 99,000 Monastery. And the monk at the 99,000 Monastery was again absolutely fascinated with what we were doing, took a great interest in the survey notebooks and the surveys that we'd done. Because often caves, as they have spiritual significance in Buddhism and in Myanmar and Thailand and places like that. And then after we left, we discovered that our visit was all over the 99,000 Monasteries Facebook page. That was Christmas Day, the 25th of December. And Christmas Day was also the day that we discovered that we had permission from the ministry to go and map the cave, which was absolutely brilliant Christmas present. Now, at this point, I need to mention this guy here, Stephen. We hired Stephen as a local guide, and he was responsible for arranging those permissions. So he's the third person absolutely integral in the chain, without which we would not have been mapping Som Hein. This photo here is actually taken right at the end of the expedition when we returned to the monastery at Monling. But with a certain symmetry for things, as we then set off on Boxing Day, we went via the monastery at Monling. We had another audience with the Seador. We left offerings. And also, he gave us one of his junior monks to come with us to Som Hein. And this is the guy with Mike in the cave. So he accompanied us when we went up to the cave. And there was another kind of subsidiary monastery related to the Monling monastery that he stayed at during the trip. So finally, we had our permissions. We had our consent from the Seador. We had our goodwill ambassador in the name of this young monk, and we could set off and drive up to Som Hein, which was probably about 3 hours drive north of Tachelek, north of the border with Thailand. But the good news was when we got there, it wasn't exactly a long walk to the cave entrance. We could almost drive directly into the cave entrance. This cave entrance actually it's not quite the real cave entrance, because about 50 yards to the left of that was the proper cave entrance. They know how to do things properly in this part of the world. And this is just a taste of what is to come as you go inside and you explore Som Hein. One of the first features in this cave is the very large Buddha built into an alcove in the roof, and the kind of majesty of that situation, which is just kind of enhanced by the cave formations in the roof. You know, you can see why these are special spiritual places, as well as just amazing caves as we would think of them in British Irish caving circles. After this, the next part of the cave contained all sorts of other interesting features put in, including these amazing dragons at the front of a boat. And a particular new one on us was this frog's mouth cave passage. So actually you can crawl through here, and there's another part of the cave on the other side. So it's really like unlike anything you'll find in Europe. And this is all because of the spiritual significance. So if you crawl through the frog's mouth, you get to a smaller series of passages. What you'll find is that in these little passages off the main drag, you find a lot of meditation mats. So the monks at the monastery or monks making pilgrimage will come and spend some time sat in the cave, meditating in the quiet environment. And we also saw plenty of pilgrims whilst we were there making survey in the cave. They were all really interested in what we were doing and the mats we were making. You know, often they wanted to take pictures of us on their smartphones as much as we were taking pictures of them. Probably the first 1.5 kilometers of the cave is an extension of a temple, really, extension of the monastery. So this is a kind of overview of the first part of the cave. It's a really very large passage, and there's all sorts of different Buddhas and other sculptures and artifacts in there. There are even toilets built into the first part of this cave. Now, unfortunately, despite there being a small monastery at the entrance to the cave, it was not possible for us to stay directly at the cave. And we stayed in the nearby town of Mong Fayat. This is a very typical town in this part of the world. You've got busy, active markets. For us, one of the advantages of staying there was we had a lot of different kind of restaurants available to us and places we could buy beer, which we wouldn't have been able to do in the monastery. But the disadvantage was we had up to an 1.5 hours journey each way, each day to get to the cave to go surveying. But it did provide a really useful base for spending our evenings inputting survey data, seeing where we've got to, having a few beers and getting excited about the project in hand. Also, just next to where we were staying was the insect market. I'm terrible and I'm really not very brave at things like this, but Dominic was super keen and tried his hand to a few delicacies. And well, I did have a bit of this in the end. It was just moss. It tasted a bit like seaweed, but yeah, I definitely wasn't brave enough for most of the things on sale in the markets. So we had this commute to do, and you know, in some ways it was really beautiful. You've got these ridges and ridges of mountains, and the sunsets were lovely, but we had to start quite early every day to make sure we could get back before dark when the roads became harder to negotiate. So, you know, it's only really when we go caving in Myanmar that we do things like get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go caving. It's a fairly unusual on any other trip I've been on, as well as a section of tarmac road. The last section of road down to the monastery is mainly unmetalled, although as the monastery and as the cave is being developed, if you like, for pilgrimage, they are working on a concrete road to reach the monastery, but it wasn't complete yet. Okay, on to more of the caving. So you've got about 1.5 kilometers of large borehole passage that's effectively an extension of the temple, and then probably at least another kilometer where there continues to be a walkway down the center of this borehole passage. If you have fewer kind of Buddha statues and other ornaments. So this is just an example of the kind of scale of that kind of passage. In some places there are some side passages as well, which can also be pretty beautiful. This is probably one of the best pictures of the expedition that Nini took, and this is just above where the previous photo was taken. So it rolled round to the 28th of December. We'd spent, well, 2.5 days really surveying in the cave, and we'd already brought the length of cave passage survey to 3 kilometers. At this point, we had made our t-shirts out of date, and we had now jumped up to the 4th longest cave in Myanmar in 2.5 days work. So we were feeling pretty pleased with ourselves. Unfortunately, the next day it rained. The trouble with rain is that when you're traveling on unmetalled roads, if you don't have a 4x4, then it can make progress very difficult. So this held us up a little bit because Mr. Mew's fantastic, but his vehicle wasn't up to the mud that ensued when it rained on the unmetalled road. So we had to wait for 4x4 transit from the monastery, and also meant we had to get up even earlier in order to get in as much surveying as possible. But survey onwards we did. This is an example of another one of the big side passages we surveyed around this time. This is very typical of a lot of cave passage in Myanmar, in that you get these big fossil borehole passages that are exceptionally well decorated in many places. In the end, this one got a bit smaller. You could possibly even touch the walls here, but it kept going. It drafted. Much to our disappointment, we actually had to crawl briefly. And the end of the day, on this day, we didn't have time. We think we know that this reconnects to the main passages somewhere else, but it's something we didn't have time to tie up. Meanwhile, Nini and others were looking down some other large side passages. This is probably one of the biggest passages in the cave, and it's a chamber, really. And this picture doesn't really do justice to it, because I think it's Dominic in the picture, and he's standing on the top of a very, very large pile of boulders. So actually the kind of chamber extends down to the left and right quite significantly. The other significant thing that happened around this time is that the monks were getting frustrated that we were spending too much time surveying small side passages and wanted to make sure we got to the main part of the cave. So they took Dominic and Nini down a small linking passage and showed them where they could pop out into the semi-active levels. So all the pictures I've shown so far have been of large or pretty large fossil passage. However, there is a semi-active level, which at the time of year we were there, Christmas and New Year, has no flowing water, but clearly takes a lot of water in the monsoon. So when you arrive in these semi-active levels, you can go up or downstream. There are a few oxbows, but if you go downstream, what happens is you arrive at this amazing set of dry gowers overlooking a drop down into a much, much bigger passage. And this is where the monks said, you can go long time walking. In many ways, this picture doesn't do it justice, but in many ways I quite like it, because you've got a big load of blackness on the right, which kind of was what we were experiencing. We've got a big space, a big passage going downstream, and who knew what we were going to find next? We kind of were thinking, well, hey, we have really hit the big time now. This was the 30th of December. We've now been surveying for 5 days. And we'd clocked up 5.4 kilometers in the book, which meant we had the longest cave in Myanmar after 5 days surveying. So more beer drinking ensued. But still, we were getting up at 6 o'clock the next morning because we needed to go and see what were down these passages. As I said at the beginning, caves are often mainly horizontal in Myanmar, but occasionally you do get small drops. On this case, we decided to use old technology, and we put in a couple of bolts for a ladder pitch to go down the gower, which was a really spectacular spot. And this is what we think that the waterfall is that the Seador and the other monks were describing to us when we spoke to them. So it's actually a dry waterfall, if you like. But it's a very obvious feature in the cave. Once we were downstream, down the pitch into this streamway, this not active, semi-active streamway, we had two options, up and downstream. So Mike and Andrea went upstream, and this is an example of some of the passages that they were mapping upstream. Again, you've still got some formations, but you can see the kind of water-worn nature of the passage, it's clear that in the monsoon, these passages take a hell of a lot of water. Really quite spectacular, really quite large upstream passages. Again, you really get an impression of the force of the water that must come through. Lots of spectacular sculpting. And I think this is the end. I say the end. This is as far as I got in one of the upstream inlets, because we only had limited time on the trip. So there are just things we didn't have time to look at. Meanwhile, myself and Pete and Dominic were going downstream, and downstream was even bigger. Some of these massive rift streamway passages, it was just huge. It was, you know, I never expected we were going to be exploring things like this on this trip. And this brought us to New Year's Eve, 6 days of surveying, 7.3 kilometers in the book. We'd been spending most of our evenings in one of two restaurants in Myanmar, and the proprietors of the restaurant, I think, were very pleased to have our money. They had also noticed we tended to drink quite a lot of beer in the evenings, and they gave us all a present of a Myanmar beer t-shirt for the New Year's celebrations, about which we were all particularly excited. As you can see, what you might or might not be able to see, depending on the size of the screen you're looking at on, is that these t-shirts say "drink responsibly" on them, which, well, some of our expedition members did more than others, let's put it that way. But New Year's hangovers or not, we had to carry on and keep surveying. The next day, Pete and I worked on some of the inlets to the downstream Monsoon River. It was just the two of us that day. I had to do kind of partly self-portrait, long exposure photography in order to get enough light in this picture. You can see it's quite big. There's also quite a lot of mud around that comes through in the monsoon. Again, in some places, really quite pretty. At the same time we were exploring these inlets, Mike and Andrea were exploring some other high-level passages back in the upper levels of the cave, because whilst we've been getting a bit distracted with the semi-active streamways, we still had open passages to map in the higher levels. And these weren't necessarily just little side passages. Some of these were really, really huge. Yeah, just staggering boreholes going off into the mountain. Now, the reason Pete and I had been exploring inlets that day is because when we'd got to the downstream summit, the downstream limit previously, we'd met a static pool of water. It was the first water that we'd seen anywhere in the cave, but it was out of depth. And we didn't fancy going for a swim in out of depth water without some flotation. Now, the first years that we went to Myanmar in, I think, 2009 and 2010, we had procured some large inner tubes for just this kind of situation, and luckily some of them were still working. Well, I say some of them. Certainly this one that Pete took. I think I had a dry bag, a tackle bag full of dry bags instead. So we set sail at the downstream limit of the cave through this pool. You can see there's just a little arch at the end of the passage. So at this point, the cave was really, really howling a strong draft because all the airflow was going through this little arch. Luckily, on the other side, it opened up again into some more big borehole passage, again, relatively well decorated. Unfortunately, not long after that, we encountered a boulder choke. We could see where in the monsoon the stream sank in the floor, but we also had this feeling that, you know, maybe there was something else to this. Why was there a boulder choke? It was the first one we'd seen in the cave, so we went for a bit of a sniff around. We had a feeling that we could be near the surface. Now, this was the point at which I regretted leaving my knee pads on the other side of the swimming pool in order to make sure I had as little weight to bog me down as possible in case I sunk with my dry bags. Because we scrambled through some pretty small holes over sharp rocks in the boulder chokes, but lo and behold, through a little squeeze and we popped back out on the surface. So that was quite satisfying in a way. It's always disappointing when a passage comes towards an end, but it was quite nice to kind of to tie it up in that way. So what did we achieve on this trip? So we spent 9 days mapping the cave. We mapped 11.6 kilometers. There were 5 or 6 of it, well, 4, 5 or 6 of us, depending on exactly which point in the expedition. So we typically ran 2, occasionally 3 survey teams. Our productivity was really about how long we spent surveying each day. So in this chart, we've got different colored bars for the different teams. The first day we hardly got anything done because we'd just arrived. This day it rained. And then we had a super productive spell of 4 days where one team or the other surveyed at least 1 kilometer in a session, which is something I've never done before. Like for 3 consecutive days, either Pete or I doing the book surveyed a kilometer together. It was staggering. One day he wouldn't let me leave until we'd done another 2 legs to make sure he got his first ever kilometer day. And really, it was all about how long we spent in the cave. Meters surveyed against hours surveying is not far off a straight line. And I think it's worth saying a little bit about how we did the surveying. So the team that we had is very much a traditional paper-based surveying team. Mike's the master sketcher and does the best cave maps I have ever seen. Pete's not too shoddy either. I think that's a picture of some of his. So everything was done with paper and pencil. However, Disto-X absolutely essential in these kinds of massive passages. And the other thing I wanted to mention with this photograph is you'll see I've got a wrist full of beads in this photograph. And that's because every time we went to a monastery at the start of this trip, we would receive a blessing, which is what these beads are. And given how well everything seemed to be going, like there was no way we were taking these off. I didn't take my blessings off until probably about a month later back in the UK when I went to quite a big meeting in London, and I started to think maybe it wasn't very professional. However, you know, since everything's gone a bit downhill since then, I'm really hoping that it's not our fault cursing the world by taking off our blessings in February. The other thing that is worth mentioning about surveying was we had to kind of try and make an effort to keep track of where people were in this system. So there was a lot of leaving notes and leaving flagging tape for people saying where we'd started and finished surveying, where we've gone. Nini and I had been up this side passage. Pete's left us a message saying they're surveying out from there. And meanwhile, on the top little note, we've got Andrea Futrell and Mike Futrell continuing into the cave. The sketcher's brain is exploding. I think this was when Mike was surveying the first 1.5 kilometers of the cave with lots of complicated detail to do with the shrines. And here's a kind of summary of the finished map. So the green is the main level, the mid-level, and the blue is the Monsoon River. So we've got the entrance up here in the top right, and probably all the way along till about here. It's really an extension of the temple of the monastery. Then if you come down here, you've got a significant side passage here. Here's our short crawling passage that's still drafting. And then this side passage, also really massive borehole passages, ways on at the end of here in some smaller passages. Main passage carries on. Important windy junction here. We had flagging tape at this junction that just blew all the time. And the reason that was blowing is because there's this little link passage going down here to the lower levels. If you went downstream from here, this is where the waterfall pitch is. If you go upstream in either of those directions, they'll eventually connect, and there's several open passages yet to be surveyed upstream. If you go downstream, there's a big inlet here, a big oxbow. Down here is the lake that Pete and I swam before emerging from a boulder choke down here. But what's most interesting about this survey and the cave as a whole is that we never saw the active water at all. So we went to this area originally because we'd identified that there was a large river sinking. We never saw that water underground. So we know there's a big river sinking about here. We never saw it. We don't know where it resurges. So we know that there are open passages that we haven't had time to survey on, but also there must be much more than this, because where is this water going? Unfortunately, we had to go home. On the way home, we stopped back in at the Monling Monastery to report on our findings to the Seador, taking him the survey on the computer, giving him a spin round cervex. And then we crossed back over the border into Thailand and drank far too much Singer beer and counted our blessings for one of the best expeditions we've ever been on. So what's going to happen now? I mean, when we left Myanmar and came home, we thought that Nini was going to lead a team of Myanmar cavers to come back and do some more surveying before the monsoons in the late spring. That would have been really, really good, because obviously a lot of survey points in the lower parts of the cave may no longer be there because of the monsoon. But then we had a global pandemic, and even they couldn't travel in the country in order to do that. Back in January, we'd hoped that we would be going back at Christmas and New Year coming to continue the work in the area. Even if Nini and his team had finished the survey, as I say, there must be more cave in the surrounding hills. But at the moment, that looks very uncertain as well. However, I really hope that that Nini and the local team will be able to get back there soon, because there's a lot to do, and it's a really, really amazing place. I'm just going to finish with a picture that Nini took of us foreigners, us incoming speleologists, towards the end of his time there. As I say, it's one of the best trips we've had. We've made some excellent friends, and we really hope that a time will come when we can get back there soon. So thank you very much for listening.
No. I am not muted anymore. Thank you so much for the presentation. One of the things that I most like when I'm talking about, expeditions with people and then sharing the experience that they had, it's the history of the place that they are going. And first of all, it's really interesting the way that you pointed that, and second, it is really, really nice to see that you went there and then you actually you gave the voice for the people of the place, and then to guide you and to put you in the right place and to actually start the whole exploration of this. I find it is really, really nice and important as well. And about the blessings, were you, so before you go into the caves, were you receiving the blessings every day before going to the cave? Is that right?
Pretty much every time we went to a monastery in the first few days. So before we had permission confirmed to go to the cave, we visited a number of different monasteries to talk about caves in the local area and to kind of seek consent from the Buddhist community to visit those caves. And typically, we would be given a blessing by the monk or the head monk, the Seador, depending on where we were. It's not something we've seen when we've been in the Southern Shan state, but it seemed to be very typical in this part of the Eastern Shan. And I think it also happens over the border in the north of Thailand as well.
That's really nice. And we have a couple of questions. The first question that actually popped up in the chat for us, it was, how is Pete's toe?
How?
is Pete's toe on the. I think PT's got his toe injured at some point, because there is just a question about Pete's toe. Yeah.
That was a long time ago now. That's probably like about 8 years ago that Pete managed to drop a large rock on his foot when we were caving in the Southern Shan state. He's missing a small bit of bone, but it's absolutely fine, not a problem.
Okay. That's good. Glad he's fine. But it was the first question that it shows up in the chat. I was like, what the hell? What's it about?
And that's why it took me a while to get what you were saying, because that was very out of context. It's like, what?
Yeah, I didn't know if there was some related to the expedition, so that's why I just said that as well. And then there is another question, which is the same that I just asked you, which is, did you have to make daily offerings at the monastery? It's a bit different, actually. It's not about the blessings, but the offerings.
We didn't make daily offerings, but we did bring gifts to the Monling Monastery before we went to the cave. So yes, that was kind of definitely part of the cultural situation, that it was important that we engage in that practice. So not necessarily every day, but certainly it was important that we did. When we were at the cave, actually, the monastery meals, so we made sure we also made donations, made offerings to the smaller monastery by the cave as well.
And that's really nice. Yeah.
Michael
and then
wants you to put the blessings back, by the way, Fleur.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Michael wants you to put the blessings back, Fleur.
I can't hear you, actually.
Oh, no.
There's something in the back. Yeah.
Ignore me. It's fine.
Can you hear me? Can you hear us well?
It's fine, Camila. It's fine. Just go.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I wasn't listening. I wasn't understanding, actually. Okay, so the next question is: how far into the cave did you find evidence of previous exploration by monks or locals?
Yeah, so the monks have been really quite a long way into the cave. Most of the evidence is within the first couple of kilometers, and after that you do get less evidence, but it is clear they probably have visited most of the cave. What it's not so obvious about is the lower levels, because obviously they flood seasonally, so it was clear that nobody had been down there this season. So we didn't find any footprints or any evidence of people having been down there recently, but from the comments it suggests they definitely have been down there at some points. So I suspect the cave gets used a lot near the entrance, and occasionally some more intrepid people go further in, but that's probably less frequent.
Yeah, and like after the dry waterfall. Yeah,
so what we found later was you could actually, if you went upstream from the dry waterfall, you could get connected back to the upstream passage from the bottom of the waterfall. But we didn't know that when we dropped that pitch. So there are other ways round that require you not to have a ladder or a pitch in the way that we did.
But then you wouldn't get that nice photo.
Oh yeah, it was a beautiful spot. It was definitely one of the highlights at that location.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then just to understand, so when it gets flow during seasons, the high of the water usually goes to the dry waterfall, or it goes directly to the part that is the monastery stays.
Yeah, so the kind of the mid-level and some higher level passages than that look like they are truly fossil and don't take any water at all. But then there were kind of two different levels of monsoon flow, and we didn't see that flow. but we can just infer from the mud deposits and the clean wash and the rock sculpting that a lot of water must come through there at some point in the year, and you wouldn't want to be there in the monsoon. But at the time we were there, there was just that one static pool that Pete and I swam. Everything else had dried out.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, thinking about the size of the cave, I can just imagine that during the seasons of the floods, it might. I mean, it will be. I can't say that it will be amazing to see it flooding, but I don't want to see it. But you got the idea, like just to imagine, like all the water just flooding, like taking all place.
Yeah, it's best not to use your imagination too much when you see the sizes of passages like that are so clean washed and so sculpted smooth by the flow of the water. But you also know it's not going to rain for a number of months, or not going to rain of any significant amount for a number of months.
Yeah, but Jesus, it's just amazing. It's just amazing. All the photos and all the features. Like I can just imagine that it was really more well decorated, like seeing these alive, like in front of you, and so white, so white. It's just absolutely lovely, really.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful cave. I mean, one of the good things was that Nini was able to talk to some of the monks about what they're doing, because obviously, a lot of construction has happened in the first part of the cave, and the good news is, they're probably finished with that, because there is a balance between the local cultural value in Buddhism of the caves and actually, the conservation message about the karst environment, which that has been growing in the country in the last 3 to 5 years since the Myanmar Cave Documentation Project has been trying to spread that message. So it's been one of the good byproducts of the expeditions, that some karst protection has been happening in places and some education about cave environments.
Yeah, and then there's a couple of comments asking you to put the blessings again to fix the rolls.
I've still got them downstairs. That's probably a really good idea. I'm going to do that.
Please fix it. And there's loads of comments saying just excellent presentation, a great presentation, a really interesting presentation, because that's true. It was a really, really, really nice presentation, and with loads of information about the the local place that the cave is and the history behind and the cave itself. It's just amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for being here. And Paul, do you want to say something? Do you want to try to come back?
It's my pleasure. It's very easy to talk about such an amazing place.
Thank you, really. And Paul, I can hear you back. No, I can't actually. Okay, so what we're going to do now? I'm going to cut a little pieces of this presentation after, and then put in our social medias as well. And I can send you to you as well, so we can just have a quick briefs on about what we chatted today. And then thank you so much for being here. Really. Thanks so much for everyone who was watching with us and participated through the comments and leaving some questions as well. And just to let you all know, our next live stream will be on the 3rd. And but I won't give more spoilers about our speaker or something, because it's a really nice person as well. It's a really well-known figure in the Irish caving scene. So, but I won't give more spoilers about that. You need to just continue following us on our social media and everything to get more details about that. So once again, thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for everyone who's been here. And Paul, thank you so much for sorting everything out. Tonight's live stream, we are using a different platform, and we were sorting this out yesterday, just trying to understand how it was working and trying to figure out, like, I'm saying we, but just because we are working the team, but I wasn't doing anything. I was just preparing the text and a bit of questions, like to have a chat with our special guest today. But then, like, the person that actually does the magic, it's Paul. behind the scenes working with everything. So thank you so much. And I believe that's all. I don't know if there is any more questions in the chat. I don't really think so. I think we covered everything. I'll let you talk if you want to say something else, Fleur. Thank you so much again. Oh. I'm just gonna continue talking. I want an interview with Desmond Morris, Veteran Cave. I'm gonna do the invite chain. Don't worry. And have you gave this presentation before about?
I gave a very shortened version of this presentation to the first Women's Caving Weekend in the Yorkshire Dales earlier this year, probably in February. Obviously, we would have talked about this expedition at Hidden Earth, but it was cancelled this year. Mike and Andrea Futrell gave a presentation about Som Hein to the NSS convention in the US. That just happened virtually. So actually, you can look up a video of their presentation online on YouTube. Mike talks a lot about the survey stats, as is his bent. But yeah, I recommend you can take a look at that if you want as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. I can put on the description of the video after. So yeah, if people want to come back here, they can just easily access that. And I'm going to put the website as well. That you left, I think, on the last slide presentation. Yeah. So I'll put these on the description of the video as well, so people can access.
It's gone dark since I started doing this. MyanmarCaves.com.
Yes. Yeah. I'm gonna put this in the description as well. And I think people, I don't know what's happening. So yeah, and then the next plans, you were planning to come back late in the year, but then if things are sorted, do you think you would come back in spring next year?
Yeah, we could potentially go back at Easter. Essentially, the best time to go is, probably the best time to go is February, March, really, because that's the driest time of year. But Christmas to Easter also works. And the reason we go at Christmas is it's just a way that works best with our holiday situation. Both Pete and I work in academia, so we either need to go at Christmas or at Easter, really. But the first time we went in February.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, during the dry season, it's important to go away. We can, yes. Okay, that's all right. So, thank you so much again for being here. And if you want to stay for a beer, we can have a beer together. Have a couple of beers downstairs, and then we can just continue chatting. That's all right. And again, thanks so much for everyone who is watching with us. And just be with the heads up in our social media, so you will know the next speaker of our live stream. Thanks so much, guys. Bye bye.